I wanted to cover enrollment options. So Nick, you mentioned that you looked into one of them, and it sounded like from what you told me, it was probably the spreadsheet option. So I'll cover that for sure. That's our most popular, but I'll indicate two others that folks can do as well. And just what the overall process looks like, show what some of the things are that you get after you sign up, and then how support would work as well. So that's the basic agenda. Um, so what is it? It's a free service of NCSBN, and at the moment, about 13,500 different healthcare organizations are signed up. And that can be hospitals, for example, but it could be a correctional facility, it could be a small clinic, it could be a staffing agency that sends out nurses to other organizations, et cetera. So it's a mix, but over 13,000. So the main thing I would say for your hospitals or your employers to know is they're not the guinea pig, they're not going first. It's a very mature system. It's been around for over a decade, and the total number of license signups, right? Because you can picture, for example, a hospital might enroll 3,000 nursing licenses. The total number of licenses in the system is literally more than 3 million. So nobody's jumping in as a beta tester at this point. Um, so the whole point of it is current and accurate licensure data delivered automatically. And so, at least as I understand the world, right, obviously employers want to know that their nurses have active licenses, right? They want to know if there's a significant disciplinary action against a license of one of their nurses. They want to know quickly, right? But these aren't things that happen by themselves. So for, let's say, hospitals that don't use eNotify, it may be that somebody in the organization is essentially checking, the Ohio Board of Nursing licensure portal, weekly, monthly, et cetera, right? To learn these things, right? When in fact it can be delivered automatically. And of course, in delivering it automatically, we're also going to be first, right? You'll get it earlier because we'll let you know as soon as something happens. So that's the major premise when it comes to eNotify. We like to say it's flexible and configurable. In other words, and Nick, you maybe saw some of this, once you do enroll, you have some choices in terms of how often you get reports and things like that, and I'll show that a little bit. So the graphic, I'm not really the fancy graphics guy, but essentially picture state licensure data, and this can certainly be Ohio, but the point is it can go beyond Ohio. It's all of our boards, right? Which is not just all 50 states, but even various US territories. Licensure data from everywhere, right? Hitting the employer's organization. Now I'm going to zoom in a little on the map of the US because we're proud of something. Michigan has just joined. And so, at any rate, folks can go to nurses.com and get real-time information on all of this. But at the moment, if you were to go there and you were to click on participating boards, you would see that it's in fact everybody now. For a while, it was 49 states. We didn't have Michigan, and as a border state to Ohio, potentially, there could be Michigan licenses of interest to you. So Michigan is in now. We actually have data real time on the website that shows you not only the jurisdiction. So I know it's a little tiny, but you maybe see Alabama. It tells you when their last upload was. It tells you, are they providing both RN and PN data? And the answer is yes to every single state. Are they providing APRN data? And that isn't true for all states. You can see, for example, Alaska is not yet. So we're actively trying to encourage. Ohio is. So thank you for that. I know Kentucky, another border state, is. So that's good news. And then whether the jurisdiction's part of the nurse licensure compact, as Ohio is as well. So this is real-time information, and it's not really a coincidence that the last data submission for Alabama and Alaska was today, because we are at NCSBN, we have built Nurses, the database that supports eNotify, to be what we call primary source equivalent. And so essentially what that means is as soon as state boards make their own updates, they upload to us within 24 hours. And so if we were to scroll down this list, we'd see some yesterdays, we'd see some todays, and sometimes there are special cases why we might see something a couple days or 3 days old. But in general, this is a pretty common picture that we're getting updated data from everywhere quite frequently. So how much does it cost? I said free before, and it really is true, but I also don't want to mislead anybody. So we don't charge a thing. Literally, it's a free service because our mission is public protection. We believe that this service helps protect the public by ensuring that the nurses taking care of people have valid licenses. If there are significant disciplinary issues, those are known by the employer, et cetera. Right? We know these days, right? If you followed recent FBI happenings, something called Project Nightingale, we know there are nurses who are having their licenses taken away in some states. And obviously, that's the sort of thing where if that happened, let's say that happened for an Ohio nurse currently working for an Ohio employer, we'd want that employer to know right away, for sure. So, at any rate, we don't charge anything. It's a free service. That said, it takes some work. So, Nick, you experienced a little bit of that. And depending how many licenses you're enrolling, how many nurses you have, it can feel like a pretty good chunk of work, or it can be pretty quick. As I go into the enrollment options, I'll cover it a little more. But the point is, we at NCSBN don't sign you up. You sign yourselves and your nurses up. And so that work is on you. Not only that, but if you upload, essentially, I'll call it your roster, one time, let's say you do that tomorrow, and you've now added maybe 17 nurses into our system, well, naturally, over time, some of those nurses may no longer work for you. You may hire other nurses, et cetera. And so if you only done the upload once, your data will get outdated, as quickly as your staff turns over, let's say. And so I say periodic updates. I'll go into a recommended frequency or a common frequency, but you can picture every week or two that organizations will say, oh, by the way, we just hired this person, so let's enroll them, on top of the enrollment that we did initially. So that sort of thing. Okay, so how organizations enroll. The one-stop shop for all of this, we call it nurses.com. So it's nurses, kind of like plural, but with a Y instead of an E, nursing system or something you can think of it as. So nurses.com, you go there, and then you'll see that it's a portal to a number of different things. One of them is eNotify, the first one. And so from there, you just click Access eNotify. And then from there, and this is, for anyone who hasn't already set up an account, it's really important to create an institutional account. So it sounds like, Nick, you were maybe creating one for Ohio Board of Nursing, which is fine, right? If the Cleveland Clinic were doing this, they could set up one for the Cleveland Clinic, for example. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize is to sort of see things, get the step-by-step manual, see a sample report, let's say, or email our help desk because you need some help. Having this account is really important. There's only so far you're going to go without creating this account, right? If you contact our help desk with an issue, the first thing they're going to ask is, okay, what's the admin login associated with this account? And if somebody says, well, we didn't actually set anything up yet, we'll say, okay, we can sort of generally help you, but we're not going to be super helpful until you have that account, because then, of course, we can go in and kind of see what's going on. So anyways, three-step process to enroll. Now, this is really just to essentially get your credentials. And from there, you've got a choice. And by the way, you're not locked in. You can start with one of these, and I'll call it upgrade, right? If later on you decide you'd rather do it a different way. But the point is, at least initially, when you're enrolling, we set up 3 different ways to go. And you could sort of picture an arrow going across the screen. Size of organization, right? As the size of organization goes up, you can picture sort of moving from left to right across these 3 options. But another way to look at it, and sometimes this happens when the size of the organization goes up, but not always. But I'm also going to picture another arrow going across in the same direction called technology know-how. So what do I mean by that? Let's pretend it's a fairly small organization, and maybe there's not a lot of technology know-how. There could be, but there doesn't have to be. Uh, well, enroll a nurse is something. Once you have your login, there's literally a button that says enroll a nurse, and it's assuming that you're going to enroll one nurse at a time. So, if you have 10,000, don't do this. But if you have 15, it's certainly viable, right? And it walks you through, type in the nurse's name, type in the nurse's license number, right? It just gives you step-by-step instructions. So that's the good news, right? It essentially walks you through it, holds your hand through the process with a friendly web interface. And so that's one way to enroll your staff. Another way is the spreadsheet. It's our most popular option. And I would say organizations with up to about 20,000 nurses do entertain this option. Some of them upgrade instead to API. When I say upgrade, I don't want to imply it costs money. It's all free. But the point is, spreadsheet, how's that going to work? Well, we give you essentially a spreadsheet format to fulfill. I'll show you an example of that soon. It's very fussy. That's the bad news, right? And people who work with data know about these kinds of things. It's sort of like if it wants, 0, 1, 2, and you just put in 1, 2, right? Because they're both 12. Nope, rejected, right? So in other words, every cell of the spreadsheet is expecting not only a certain kind of data, but for it to have a certain format. And so that's really, really important. For instance, when it's license type and we're expecting RN, if somebody were to type in registered nurse or R period N period, well, that would be rejected, sadly enough. They'd get a notice that there was an error in the file. So it is fussy, but once you follow the rules and get the hang of that, and I'm always happy to help, it tends to be a fairly simple way to go. It's pretty flexible in terms of the number of nurses, right? You could use it if you had 3 nurses. You could use it if you had 20,000 nurses. And updates tend to be pretty simple as well. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, high end, right, is what we call our API solution. And API for organizations that have some technical staff, programmers, et cetera, that are willing to lend their talents in kind of the personnel or HR area. It's great because what you can do is generally all of your people live in a particular system. Here at NCSBN, I think it's ADP, some places Workday, Oracle, et cetera. But the point is, everybody sort of already lives in this giant database. It has their license number. It has all this information on them. Well, with the API, you can essentially get your system to talk to the nurse's database. So nobody has to upload spreadsheets. There's some upfront programming, and it just creates this continuous feed back and forth between your system and the state licensure data. So it takes the longest to set up and the most technical staff, but once you do it, it's then the least work afterward because it's essentially no work afterward, which is beautiful. So what do folks need to sign up? I'm going to go ahead and show the spreadsheet as an example. And I do want to comment especially on social security number, or last 4 digits, I should say, because that is one that I get the most questions about. So what information is needed? Well, some standard demographic area information, sorry, name, jurisdiction, what kind of license, et cetera. 2 fields that we call validation fields, year of birth and social security last 4. I'll say a little more about those in a second. And then this spreadsheet, we wish it stopped at column L. It actually goes on a little longer. And if you're a hospital, we're interested in data on where does the nurse work, like, critical care versus, emergency room versus et cetera. We've got a list of codes for things like that. But what I want to do here, and then I'll come back to those 2 fields I get asked about a lot, is just highlight some things. So I mentioned the formatting of the spreadsheet is fairly fussy, right? We have to get things exactly right or our records bounce back. But at any rate, this first column where you see these A's, that's just signaling our system that you're adding these people in. You're adding these licenses to your system, right? So if it's an initial upload, everybody's an A. But maybe 6 months from now, you've got a few A's because you have some new hires, but you've got some R's, which stands for remove, right? Some removals because some people have left the organization. Where you see the B, well, you can probably guess that's the jurisdiction of interest. So Ohio, right? 3 Ohio licenses and a Kentucky license. You may notice the same person, if there are baseball fans out there following the Reds' hot rookie, you can picture Ellie De La Cruz. But I'll say Ellen De La Cruz is listed twice because her Ohio license and her Kentucky license, at least in my example, are both of interest. And so she's enrolled twice. Now, if only her Ohio license were of interest, no need to sign her up twice, right? But we work with a lot of organizations who have nurses who work in multiple facilities, including in different states, for the same organization. So I wanted to list an example of that. Um, Going from there, we've got the nurse license number. I probably didn't follow your Ohio formatting. This is sort of a generic-ish example of license numbers. But again, the idea is, you would follow the Ohio formatting for that, or Kentucky in the case of the final record. RN versus PN would go there. Email address of the licensee, right, of your staff member is actually optional. We would only use it if you configure your eNotify settings where you want us to directly email the licensee when their license is 30 days from expiration. That's it. So if you say, no, we're not interested in that, we're going to remind them ourselves. We don't really want you to get in touch with them directly. You would literally just leave this field blank. Or even if you accidentally filled it in, you just configure your settings for us not to do that. But of course, the easiest way is just to leave it blank. So I showed it with some email addresses here, but leaving it blank is certainly fine. And in our specifications, we let people know which fields are allowed to be blank and which ones do require being filled in. Now, FGH and I'm going to kind of cover all together. It's the work address, right? So if anytime you're thinking, oh, do I want to put my employee's home address into the system? No, don't worry. It's the facility address, the work address, right? And then, there are, I'll say, this is relaxed a little bit because of, thankfully, the nurse licensure compact, but right, the system would report an error. Let's pretend we were talking about non-compact states if the nurse license jurisdiction, in other words, column B, did not match the facility work address. So if I believe California is a non-compact state. If we had, for example, somebody working for a California or working on a California license for a Nevada employer, something like that, we would turn up an error because technically that's problematic. Okay, from there, we get to the controversial fields that I want to speak to. So the first is last 4 digits of Social Security number, and the next one is birth year. Now, these are two things that employers almost always are going to have. We like these fields for two reasons. The first is one additional level of validation. We know that there are, let's say in the state of Ohio, multiple nurses with the same name, right? We know sometimes, while license number is unique, sometimes the way an employer, maybe not a large one, but sometimes the way an employer ends up with a license number is that they've done a lookup on the state site by name. Maybe there were 17 Mary Smiths and they thought they had the right one. So they went and grabbed that license number, but it actually turns out it isn't their employee. It's a different Mary Smith. So last 4 social, year of birth really help confirm that this is absolutely the nurse of interest. So that's one thing, right? It assures validation. It assures we have a direct hit. So for that reason, it's helpful, right? But we also know that these are the most sensitive fields. And so we do allow you to apply for a waiver of one or both fields. It's not like a 30-page form. It's literally like a 1-paragraph email. And organizations can say, we really want to do eNotify, but we want to leave these 2 fields blank. Or we're okay with year of birth. We don't want to do last 4 SSN. And I will say for legitimate organizations, these are 100% approved, right? It's not quite a rubber stamp, but the point is it's not super, you don't have to lose sleep at night wondering if your application will be approved. I mentioned there's a second reason that we like these. I'm not worried about Ohio Board of Nursing. I'm not worried about Cleveland Clinic. Here's what we are worried about at NCSBN. We don't want, I'll call it sort of a spoofer. We don't want somebody who's not even an employer of nurses to essentially go in and recreate our nurses, right? We put a lot of work in. We don't want somebody who essentially, I shouldn't use the word steal, but I'll say it anyways because I'm not creative for synonyms today. We don't want somebody to steal all our data by essentially enrolling 4 million nurses who they claim to somehow have some professional affiliation with. So one of the ways we get around that is we say, okay, let's say it's a nefarious actor who really just wants to harvest all of our data and replicate our database and maybe sell it to people when it's supposed to be free, right? Well, whoever that person is much less likely to have this information, right? They're much less likely to have last four SSN. They're much less likely to have year of birth. They can make up work addresses. They can leave email blank, right? They might figure out some way to list a whole bunch of Ohio license numbers. So we call it validation info partly because it validates that, yes, this is the nurse you think it is, but it's also validation for us to validate this is a legitimate organization that has a legitimate relationship with the nurses on the list. So that's the idea there. So naturally, if Ohio Board of Nursing wrote for a waiver, we know you're legitimate, right? We exist at your pleasure. So who are we to say no? So you can absolutely get a waiver. And that's true for your employers as well. We would just need to do a little sleuthing and we need them to fill out the email. And then as soon as we figured out, yeah, this is a real place, Cleveland Clinic, got it. They're good. They don't need to fill in these fields. But that does have to be arranged in advance. They can't just upload data missing these values and think that we'll figure out who they are, right? They have to talk to us. Okay, I mentioned there's the initial enrollment, right? Let's pretend you have 200 nurses. Well, okay, you got to get them all into the system somehow. From there, periodically, well, your staffing changes. So you're going to want to tell the system that you have some changes, right? You've added some nurses or you've dropped some nurses. The question I get is, how often should we do that? And the answer I give is, it's really up to you. We don't have rules in our system, but it's always worth knowing that the data we give you back, right, the notifications we're feeding you, are only as good as the data you've given us. So for example, if you update your enrollments on the first of every month, and then it's the 10th of the month and you've made a new hire, that person isn't going to be reflected for your next 20 days, right? So there are a couple ways to go. Most organizations, I would say, go every 2 weeks. Sometimes the ones with API go daily because nobody has to do any work. It just happens. So there's that. But the folks doing spreadsheets or enrollers, they tend to save it like every other Friday or something like that, or 15th and 30th of the month, or we'll do it the same as payday, whatever makes sense to them. It is real work, right? If they've hired 3 nurses, they need to fill in 3 lines of our fussy spreadsheet. So I don't want to pretend they just snap their fingers, right? It's real work. So every 2 weeks is pretty typical. Obviously, if they want their data to be much, 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 much more current, they can do it more frequently than every 2 weeks. Or if they believe in their situation that monthly is just fine, we certainly don't impose any rules or encourage them to do it more often than that, right? It's whatever fits the organization. But whenever people say, Jason, we don't know, just tell us, I say most people do it every 2 weeks. Here's some good news. Pretend that you are an organization with 200 nurses that you enrolled last week, and now you've made one new hire, and you say, okay, I want to update our staffing to include this one person. The good news is you can submit a spreadsheet with one person. You don't have to submit your whole team of 201 licenses all over again, right? Once it's in the system, we got it. You don't have to give it to us again. We're going to keep it, so to speak. We're going to know that's your nurse. So you don't have to, every time you do an update, give us your whole history. All you need to do is indicate we're adding these 2 or 3 people. We're removing these 1 or 2 people. That's it, right? And of course, those numbers vary on the size of the organization. Maybe it's 38 people that we're all adding on the same day. What do you get for your troubles? Because obviously it's some work to sign everybody up. Well, you get current and accurate data, and it's automated. So I mentioned before, a lot of organizations every month or so, if they can get to it, do manual lookups of licenses. to try to make sure that everybody is still, who they think they are and, with the license status that they need to have. Okay. Well, what does that mean? It means you might have a 30-day lag in the accuracy of your data, but it also means a lot of work every month, and it's pretty tedious too, right? Most of the state licensure databases don't really allow what I'll call bots, automated programs that can just, jump in and check this, right? It tends to be fairly manual, fairly manual and fairly tedious. So we give it to you, you get your licensure status changes. Let's say a license was revoked, maybe as part of that FBI investigation. Well, you're going to see it right there. License revoked for this person. Okay. And you'll get that immediately, right? Renewal reminders. And this is a little bit optional. Some people don't want too many emails, but the system defaults to sending you a renewal reminder 30 days out for a particular nurse. And of course, in some states where all renewals are the same day, you might get a whole bunch all in one day. Now you can either have us send those to you, send them direct to the nurses, or not send them at all. So you've got options there. Disciplinary action notifications. Here's something I like about these, and this is really unique to eNotify. Let's pretend that an Ohio employer had a nurse where Ohio, things are looking pretty clean. That's good. But the Nevada Board of Nursing just ruled on a case involving the nurse, right? Maybe the nurse had diverted drugs or something like that. And finally in Nevada, a decision was made. And so there's disciplinary action against that nurse's Nevada license. Well, if we're just looking in an Ohio database, let's say, we might not know about that. However, eNotify, once you tell us who your nurse is, we know their whole story. We know all their jurisdictions that they're licensed in. We will give you that disciplinary notification out of Nevada for a license you've enrolled as Ohio, believe it or not, right? Now we'll, you'll be able to tell. We don't want to confuse anybody that this Nevada thing was an Ohio thing. We'll clarify, but okay. But the point is you get all that. And then how do you get it? Well, you've got a dashboard. I'll show that, what we call our nurse list, and then customized reports. So I'll just show a few graphics here. So I've got a pretty clean staff here over at my test account. But this is the dashboard, right? So I'm in eNotify. I'm logged in as Jason Schwartz. This is just at a glance, right? Okay, I've got 200 nurses in my nurse list. Perfect. That's about what I thought. Okay. And I'm seeing zero, 0 red, 0 yellow, 0 orange, right? So essentially it's telling me, Jason, nothing to worry about, right? But you can imagine one day, maybe you jump into your dashboard, right? We would have emailed you as well, but one day you jump into your dashboard and you see expired, and instead of a 0, you see 17. Uh-oh, 17 people missed the renewal deadline. Yikes. Well, as the picture indicates, you can click view and you'll see this list of 17 licenses that expired, unfortunately, right? And same with these other numbers, right? As they become something other than 0, you click and you learn more. I mentioned the nurse list. Similar story when you're in eNotify, you can just call up your nurse list, right? It's just a nice web interface. You pull up your nurse list and it's all your licenses, right? This one we're pretending we just have 4, but okay. And on your nurse list under license status, you can see some things of interest, right? Okay, license status unencumbered. I think I like that. Oh, probation, see nurse report for Patricia Pentos. We could go ahead and click on her name and get that sort of detail. The nurse list also gives you a little bit of a shortcut for removing nurses from your roster. So I mentioned before, if you're using the spreadsheet upload, that you would, if maybe 3 nurses have left your organization, you could upload their records with an R for remove instead of an A for add. But that's a little more trouble than what I'm about to tell you here. You could just pull them up in your nurse list and literally toward the far right, you see delete, and you could just click the X to delete. It'll say, are you sure? Right? But the point is that's a very quick way if you have nurses who retire, resign, etc., leave the organization, to reflect that in your list. Now, is it the end of the world if you don't do that? Is it the end of the world if you forget to remove nurses when they leave the organization? I would say not really, other than it creates inbox clutter, right? Once they've left your organization, if you haven't wiped them out from your nurse list, if you haven't unenrolled them from eNotify, you're going to continue to get notifications involving them. You're going to continue to get license renewal reminders involving them. If you've set it up for some kind of automated email to their work address, you're going to get bounce back emails, right? So the point is, it's nice to kind of keep your list clean, but it's not the end of the world if you forget to remove somebody. It'd be worse to forget to add somebody new from a public protection standpoint than to forget to unenroll somebody. Okay, I'll show you just one more thing. Here's another view that we can get. This is nice for large organizations. At first, you might look at it and say, what's the difference, or what is it? It looks different, but isn't it kind of the same? Okay, so you can pull up your nurse list and you can see all of your nurses, but as you can imagine, most of the time, 95, 96, 97% of them, nothing interesting happened, right? That's a good thing. You don't want interesting things to happen with nurse licenses. So, particularly if you've got a large workforce, or you just like to have your data filtered nicely, you can actually configure a report to only show you nurses where there was some change, licenses where something happened. And so this is this kind of filtered, pre-filtered report where every single person listed had something happen. So Stacy at the top, expiration date changed. We might imagine, oh, good, that person must have renewed. So now their expiration date is 2 years further into the future. Well, we got this long list of people discipline added. Hopefully nobody we know. No, all right. Anyways, discipline added. Great. We can click their name and see what it was. Right. We got another expiration date change near the bottom. We've got active status changed, license status changed. That's interesting. We're going to want to click on that. So the idea is, sometimes this gets nicknamed a Delta report. It only shows changes. And certainly if there's a large workforce, like your larger hospitals, visually going down a list of 2,000 nurses looking for interesting things is not fun, and it's easy to miss something. But with this list, every record is interesting. So there's that. I mentioned configurations. So in terms of how often do you get these notifications, most organizations, I think, like daily. And then there's a nice note here. If nothing ever changed, right? If nothing interesting ever happened, if you wanted, or well, I shouldn't say if you wanted, we will just every 3 months or every quarter, every 3 months, let you know, hey, nothing changed, right? Just so you don't worry that somehow you fell out of the system. So you have all users are able to essentially get the kind of information they want as often as they want it, and they've got choices. Nobody wants to walk in, check their email on a Monday, and have 78 things from nurses eNotify, unless there literally were 78 super important things that happened that they definitely had to know, right? Nobody wants to turn it into spam, and so you have full control over that. So I like to put the reminder at the end. We had it at the beginning, right? But at the end, again, nurses.com is where you go. You're going to click on this thing to access eNotify and then create an account. That account is who we would think of as the admin over the account. So sometimes people ask, can we change it later? Yeah, you could change it to somebody else. Could you have two admins? Yeah, you actually could, right? But initially, for anything to happen, at least one person in the organization needs to create a login by following these steps. And then from there, we can certainly help modify it to just about anything that works. But initially, somebody should do that. And then once you've done that, what support do we provide at NCSB? And I did mention that the enrollment really does fall on the organization, not us directly, but we're here to help. So I look familiar by now. That's me on the left. I'm more general support. If it's a super hard technical question, I'm probably not your guy. But in terms of how which of the three enrollment options seems to make sense, I'll get to know things like, do you have somebody really technical, or do you have a couple of programmers with some spare time, and then I might recommend API, or do you have somebody good with Excel who could devote a little time to this? Perfect. I'll probably go with the Excel option. Or if it's a small employer with 2 nurses, I'll say, you know what, I'd probably go with the enroll a nurse option. Let me show you how that goes. So just general things that help people get started or as they go. Jason, we tried to upload our file and nothing worked. Well, I'm happy to take a look. Oh, you put R period, N period. We just need RN. That killed every record. Try it again, see what happens. For more complex things, we have a full technical team, a number of people that check this inbox. I'm over on the right side now where it says nurses eNotify at ncsbn.org. They can handle a lot. And of course, we also have a technical user guide. So for example, if somebody wanted to enroll via API, that is no small feat, right? You do need an instruction manual, but we have that. It defines all the data elements and sort of how they talk to each other and all that. So we've got, I would say I'm here for general inquiries and helping people get started and get some momentum. And if they're like, oh, this might be a dumb question, I don't want to bug the technology people, I'll take it. In my world, there are no dumb questions. But at some point you get far enough along and you're like, oh, I need to do this really complex technical operation. Jason, what do I do? I'll say, let's email nurses eNotify at ncsbn.org.